then interpreters always need to keep their cameras off.
Thank you, Gabi.
Okay, sure. Let me do it now. Hello, everyone. This is Gabriela, and I am the Spanish interpreter, and I would like to give each and one of you a nice welcome today on this beautiful day. We have a language access today. So what I would like to do is to give instructions to each and one of you how to join the channel that you prefer. So I'm going to switch to Spanish now because we have language access for our Spanish speakers. So I'm going to switch to Spanish now. Muy buenas tardes, bienvenidos. Me gustaría darles una cordial bienvenida en un día tan bonito como el de hoy. Les quería dejar saber a todos que tenemos acceso de lenguaje el día de hoy. Si usted va a usar una computadora para el día de hoy, por favor, mire la parte de abajo de su computadora. Ahí va a ver un globo del mundo. Dele clic a ese globo e inmediatamente va a ver que dice inglés y español. Escoja español e inmediatamente puede entrar al canal. Y yo voy a estar allí. Y por favor, si fuera tan amable de dejarme saber si me puede escuchar en el chat, sería maravilloso. Si usted está usando un teléfono, es un poquito diferente, son 5 pasos. Paso número 1, usted va a tocar su pantalla. Número 2, va a haber 3 puntos en la parte derecha. Toque esos 3 puntos y va a haber un menú que tiene varias opciones, entre ellas lenguaje, interpretación. Dele allí y va a escoger Spanish o español. Y el último paso es muy importante. Va a irse a la parte de arriba a la derecha de su teléfono y va a escoger donde dice DONE, que es done en inglés, o listo o finalizar en español. Depende de qué lenguaje esté utilizando en su teléfono. Entonces, si tienen preguntas, por favor, estamos aquí para ayudarlos con acceso al lenguaje. Déjenos saber si necesita ayuda. Gracias. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the meeting.
Gracias, Gabi. Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. If you haven't done so already, if you could take a moment and update your name in Zoom with your role in the community. I also haven't done that, so I'm just gonna go ahead. You can put your pronouns in there too if you want to. Welcome to the Peirce LSC meeting. I am Claire Gervasi and I'm not Aisha Noble, and my pronouns are they, them. I am chairing this meeting today because Aisha had a family emergency. So welcome. The members of the LSC are the elected representatives of our school. The LSC is responsible for setting the school's direction and policies and for monitoring its financial and educational programs. All participants are muted, and we will invite you to unmute during public participation as indicated on the agenda if you wish to share an update or ask a question. If there are private chat conversations you'd prefer not to share with the LSC, I would advise you that you use personal devices for those conversations, as the host receives a full chat log of all Zoom participant chat conversations at the conclusion of the meeting. This meeting is being live streamed to YouTube. For those watching via YouTube, you may email questions to peircelsc@gmail.com. Should there be any disruptions during the course of the meeting manager, Mr. Lee, will use Zoom to mute and turn off the cameras of all participants while the disruptive attendee is removed. If we are unable to remove a disruptive participant, we will close the meeting and a new meeting link will be emailed out to attendees. If you do not receive a meeting link within 5 minutes, please email peircelsc@gmail.com or a new link will be shared with you. During the meeting, LSC members will be unable to monitor comments in the chat while discussing school business. However, parent volunteer April Browning has kindly agreed to monitor chat and the live stream of our meeting. We ask that you save your questions for public participation, at which time we will ask you to type stack in the chat so that we can invite you to speak in the order indicated. At the conclusion of the meeting, Ms. Amy will receive the video recording of the meeting, which will be posted to the LSC Google Drive on the Peirce website. It will also be available on our YouTube page. While the chat is not an official part of the meeting, it is a necessary community building tool for Peirce folks to connect with each other. Chat is the way for attendees to see each other virtually and participate together as an audience. We rely on attendees subscribing to the IB profile in their interactions, especially being inquirers, knowledgeable, principled, open-minded, caring, balanced, and reflective. These are the norms for using the chat. And so with that, I call the meeting to order. Can we do a roll call, please? Claire Gervasi, Vice Chair, Chair of this meeting.
Bill Kennedy, present.
Lori Zamey.
Javier Seawright, Parent Rep.
Evan Tread, Teacher Rep.
Jerry Baumgarten, Teacher Rep.
Sandra Kafarkas, non-teaching rep.
Nicole Granicki, Community Rep.
Elisa Wartic, Community Rep.
Matthew Kwame, Parent Rep.
Is that everybody? Wow, there's so many of us. I didn't know we could all make this meeting. I'm so glad that we're all here to have this conversation because it is a special meeting and I appreciate you all being here to do this, to really focus on this conversation. And so I guess the next step is to approve the order of the agenda, which hopefully everybody has access to. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the order of the agenda.
Thanks, Bill.
Sorry, I was on mute. Bill got me.
Is there a second?
I second.
Cool, thank you. All in, or is there discussion? Okay, all in favor? You can raise your hand. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, we have an agenda. Thank you all. So I guess we'll start in with accessibility. And I don't have a lot of prepared remarks, but I would like to say that myself and Elisa and are the subcommittee, and Ms. Amy is also, I don't know if you're officially on the subcommittee, but you have been instrumental in helping with the work we're doing there. And we've also been gathering a lot of ideas and best practices from other stakeholders in the community, especially parents who have been really helpful in sharing their knowledge about best practices for online meetings from their own professional lives and like else in other circles that they participate in. So I've kind of been working on that over the course of the last couple of months to kind of pull it together. And I pulled it all into this document, which is very much a draft, but I would love to show it to you all. And kind of maybe share some of what I have learned so far. And then if you all have questions, we can talk through it, and maybe you all have ideas that I don't have down yet. So if that sounds okay, I think I'll go ahead and share my screen.
And Claire, before you do that, I just wanted to make sure, maybe just ask Jerry or Evan, like, I mean, you were the catalyst for this meeting. Is there something specific we should think about addressing or bringing up, before we kind of go down the list of prepared things and whatnot? Just want to make sure that, because you all asked for that meeting, so.
Thank you, Matthew. That's
putting you on the spot.
No, that's a good place to start. I appreciate that.
So we did ask for this meeting because we had been approached by numerous staff members about the chat function and the use of the chat during meetings. Since Jerry and I are, and Sandra are representative of all of the staff, we actually sent them a survey over the weekend asking for some feedback on the chat. And when we did that, the results, the question we asked is, do you feel the chat function during LSC meetings adds value to the meetings? 48% of the 52 respondents voted or said no. 30% said maybe, and 21% said no. There were a lot of comments that were given by staff and teachers about the chat function. Jerry, did we want to take some time to read those, or do you?
Hey, Evan, can you repeat those numbers? Because you said no twice.
Thank you, Matthew.
So the question was, do you feel the chat function during LSC meetings adds value to the meetings? 8.1% said no, 30.8% said maybe, and 22% said yes.
And I would just add to that, Matthew, that upon reflection, Evan and I usually talk after LSC meetings. We decided that it would behoove us to send out a survey so that it is known that this is not just representative of what Evan and I feel, but as a representative of what the people that elected us feel. So that is what the need for this survey was. We are happy to share some of those comments with you at this time if you would like, but yes, that was the reason that the meeting was requested.
So I just want a point of clarification. Zoom chat is actually the next order of business, and right now we're talking about accessibility. And chat is an aspect of accessibility, but is a separate topic on our agenda. So is it okay if we wait to focus on that after public participation?
Sure, I think we were, yeah, sure. I think we were just addressing Matthew's question. So however you want to do it, in what order, we're more than happy to oblige.
So
Okay.
Can I also maybe make a point of clarification? So there were two different things that came out of the last meeting. One is what Jerry and Evan just said, which is one of the items on the agenda, but the other was accessibility based on feedback from parents. And us thinking about the chat in relationship, I think, to accessibility, but then also accessibility features in general, per the Board of Education's policy.
Right. So I guess we can just start with we can start with the chat and accessibility, how it relates to accessibility, since that is a primary concern. From my perspective, well, I'll just go. Well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if that's all right with you all. Okay, can you see? It says using the chat. Is that what you all are looking at? Okay, cool. This is a little, I'm calling it a toolkit because I don't know what else to call it right now. It's like a list of best practices and kind of the summation of what I've researched so far and what I've gathered from other people so far. And as far as the chat goes, there are, the functions of chat are taking stack. Simple directional questions can be answered there without having to disrupt the flow of the meeting. And then chat is also a tool of successful meetings because it keeps attendees engaged. And I would also say that, you know, based on feedback that I've heard from parents, that not having the chat is akin to not being at the meeting, because there's no way to be a body, to be a collective audience. And part of that is like seeing who's in the room. And I've heard from parents that when we have turned off chat, that has felt really like kind of a rejection of participation. Even as, you know, not in terms of public participation, but just in terms of being a person who matters in the meeting. So some chat best practices, if we are going to continue with chat, is to keep in mind that chat is not part of the official meeting. It is a tool for connection and a way to keep stack. So a best practice is generally to have a chat manager. And the guidance we received from OLSCR was that, from the Office of LSC Relations, is that that person should be a volunteer and not be an employee of the school. You know, we have a Peirce parent who has very graciously given many, many hours of her time to being that person. She also does that and many other things professionally. So we're very lucky to have her expertise. And the role of the chat manager, whether it's April or someone else, is to monitor the chat conversation for adherence to meeting norms, which of course we would need to codify what those norms are. I have suggested some down here that we can talk about momentarily. And to provide resources throughout the meeting, such as agendas, other pertinent information, you know, if there isn't a chat manager, the chat can be self-managed by the collective group. This is usually not a problem in most meetings. I've gone to the latest PAC meeting and BAC meeting and FOP meeting, and the chats were all fine in those meetings, and there's no chat manager. You know, I know that LSC meetings, you know, sometimes seem to be a lightning rod for controversy. So I think it's good to have a chat manager, but I do also believe in people's ability to self-manage. Guidelines for engaging in the chat are the same as the norms for meetings. So adhering to the guidelines are adhere to the norms, or you may not participate in the chat. And if you don't wish to see the chat, you can minimize it and turn off notifications. There are instructions from Zoom on how to do that. And then for LSC meetings specifically, it's we've been given the guidance that LSC members should not engage the chat since it's not an official part of the meeting. The only contact between the chat and the LSC should be via the chat manager to the chair of the meeting, who can communicate any necessary info, mostly stack. LSC members are advised to turn off chat notifications and close the chat window to avoid distraction. And so that is what I have for chat. And so where that overlaps with accessibility is in terms of, I'm going to stop sharing this for a second. The standards for accessibility that we were told about are fairness and reasonability. And since the chat is not an official part of the meeting, it is not subject to the same accessibility concerns that like the actual meeting itself is, like public participation and being able to hear or, you know, access the information that's being shared by the LSC. Thank you, April, for putting that in the chat. So that's what I have on chat and accessibility. And then other accessibility stuff. Well, I guess I can stop there and we can talk about
I just wanted to say, so after the last meeting, Claire and I met with Justin. Elisa was going to join us. Somehow my Google invite did not make it to Elisa's calendar. So Claire and I met with Justin, and I think the challenge, or part of like the sort of like dilemma that we're in, is that there's no law that defines the use of chat in LSC meetings, because we're using virtual platforms as a result of the pandemic. And so that's where the issue of what is fairness and fair and reasonable comes in. And so there's nothing that says we cannot use chat, but then there's nothing that says that we have to use chat. So that's where it's up to us as a council to decide what it is that we want to do with chat. And I think that there have been, you know, as Claire said, and as Jerry and Evan have said, there have been different perspectives in the way that chat is being looked at.
So we said that chat was part and parcel to what we're talking about in terms of accessibility. And I know we're going to have a specific section to discuss chat. But if we want to recenter that on accessibility, what are we proposing? What are we suggesting? What did the office said we could or consider or could do or not do?
Office of Local School Council Relations recommended only using chat during public participation, but that's not the rule, right? Like there's no rule. That's a recommendation, but it doesn't. It's up to individual councils to decide what they're going to do.
Right. So understood that. That's for chat. I'm asking like, what else? Because I mean, you know, some of the concerns that some of the parents brought up were around recordings, around transcripts, whether it's in English, in the other languages. Where are we on that?
It goes to the question of what's fair and reasonable. And so given the percentage of families who speak Spanish in our school community, it is reasonable to say that we will have Spanish translation interpretation at every school meeting. From an accessibility standpoint, there may be accommodations or things that we haven't been thinking about because we haven't heard about those needs. And so I think one of the questions was related to the use of sign language during meetings. If there is a need for sign language, then we can say that we're going to either offer sign language at every meeting, or we can say, based on what we've experienced at the school, that wouldn't necessarily be reasonable because we haven't had multiple requests for sign language to be available. So we could say sign language would be available upon request through a request for an accommodation, but it won't be at every meeting. Whereas if we were in a school where majority of those that would be in participation required sign language, it would be reasonable to have that at every meeting.
So do we have suggestions on the process to go about that request being put in, then implemented, then followed up on? And then how do we pay for it? Or is there a cost component? Also, and I apologize if you said it because you said a lot of things. My main thing is also like, and we've talked about it, you know, a couple of the parents reached out and they made some really good suggestions about the translation specifically. So how do we, because right now we have a translator. The translation is going on live. There is no transcript for that translation, as it were. And it is possible, and I apologize, Claire, if you already discussed that. It is possible that there is a mechanism where we can record or at least save the translation to then subsequently have a record of it. I've personally not been able to find something that, I think that there have been some suggestions that were made, but I haven't found anything. I know Nicole shared with us, like I think it was Deep L or something like that, but that uses words and then does the translation. I don't know, so like, we, right now we're live streaming on YouTube. We're not, I haven't, I asked a couple of people, we currently haven't found a way to capture that voice and get it saved, then translated so we can release it. I'm trying to figure out how we do that.
So I just found today when I was tooling around in Zoom settings that you can save each individual speaker's sound file separately. And so I think we could save the interpreter's sound file and upload that with the meeting minutes, and people could play them simultaneously. And that would, I mean, we could still generate a transcript, but we would have to, I think that would be very proactive of us. I don't know that we have the capacity for that on a volunteer basis in this moment, because what it would require is to take the saved live transcript from English, copy edit it for errors, and then put it into a translator and then run that for copy errors. And I personally have tried to do this for another meeting that I was in, and I worked on it for 8 hours and did not finish. So I think it's that expectation of having a bilingual transcript of each meeting is not doable. That would be my recommendation, but we could have the audio file saved, I believe. So at least there would be that. Because I agree with you, like after the meeting is over, there's no way for a Spanish speaker to watch this video and get anything out of it. Of course, the meeting minutes are available in Spanish, but that's different than having the whole log, right? So we're meeting the minimum standard by having the minutes in Spanish, but we could be more proactive in providing that audio file as well. That's my thought anyway.
And currently the audio file is not saved. How do we go about saving that?
It's just a matter of changing the settings in the Zoom account that the school uses for the meetings, and there are instructions for that. And then we should experiment with that and see what happens before we use it officially. But I think that's a capability we can engage. And I can just share oh, Gabi is chiming in the chat. Let's see. Oh, yes. Licensing and copyright of an interpreter recording is possibly an issue. So maybe we can't do that. That would be a good thing to consult with the interpreter about. Yeah. So we might be limited to just having meeting minutes translated.
So it's not that this thing doesn't exist. It's just more trying to figure out how we acquire it, secure it, and make it available.
Well, I mean, unless there's, like, I don't know what the rules are for recording, like saving the recording of an interpreter, and whether or not that's ours to use or not. But I mean, I think there is a cost associated with it, but it's something we could definitely look into. Right now, the accommodations that we routinely use for meetings are the video and chat functions are optional for participants. Like, you don't have to have your video on, you don't have to participate in the chat. You can just, come as you are to the meeting. There's a live transcript is turned on for English. There's YouTube streaming for those who prefer YouTube, which also has closed captioning. There is live Spanish-English interpretation, and there's closed captioning. And that's what we routinely provide as a as an accommodation for virtual meetings. Whether or not that is enough to be, meet the reasonable standard for our specific community is kind of what we can discuss here.
I have a question for Principal Zamey. Do we track requests for accommodation?
We haven't advertised or like put out there request for accommodation. It was something that I think was brought to my attention at the last meeting. So in conversation with Claire, we've drafted language that would be shared to the community for LSC meetings. So no, we don't. Short answer, no.
Okay.
But we have like a draft process where if that request is made, I guess the thing also is kind of how quickly can that be accommodated, that request, if any of it.
So
any
the
of it.
requests would come to me. I would then work with the ADA office, and then they would work with the school to fill the request. So the language in the policy is 48 hours prior to the meeting. I'm not sure if 48 hours, to be honest, is enough time.
Right.
I just dropped in the chat. Sorry, Matthew, to interrupt, but that's what I've drafted, with Principal Zamey so far. So, and we would post it in all of those places where it says post this.
Do you want to read it, Claire? Speaking of accommodations. You're on mute.
You're mute.
Farts. Thank you for your interest in attending Peirce's LSC meeting. Peirce strives to make meetings as accessible as possible. For this reason, we routinely include the following accommodations for virtual meetings. Video and chat functions are optional for participants. Live transcript is on for English. YouTube streaming for those who prefer that platform. Spanish-English interpretation. Closed captioning. If you need accommodations beyond those specified here, please contact the principal, Ms. Lori Zamey, in writing at least 48 hours in advance of the meeting you would like to attend. The sooner you alert her to the need, the sooner she can work on accommodating it. So please feel free to reach out well in advance. She will do everything within her power to accommodate your request. The principal's email address. And of course, this can apply to any meeting that Peirce has, that's a public meeting. It doesn't, it says LSC in this language, but it's totally generalizable.
That was going to be my next question, Claire. So what, you said any meeting that's a public meeting. Does that mean all the parent group? Well, I guess I can just list them off the top of my head, but FOP, REP, RET, PPLC, all those meetings?
Anything that's a standing subcommittee of our LSC is subject to the same rules that we are. So like that, those meetings will fall under that. And then I think also BAC and PAC, which PAC is not a thing now, but because those are also public, subject to OMA kinds of meetings.
So only the public bodies, not the, like REP is not a public body. RET is not a public body. Those ADA rules will not apply. Is that true, Principal Zamey or Justin?
I am not sure if it would be like school-based committees or meetings, like if we did orientation for kindergarten families. It seems reasonable to say that like if there's a accommodation, we should match that, right? Because that would be access to your school. So I guess I don't know what all. I feel like the humane thing to do is try to honor like accessibility needs. So I feel like I don't know that like limiting it to only meetings that are subject by Open Meetings Act would be the right way to go. I guess
I agree. I think in terms of, ADA accommodations, that's all covered under ADA, right? As far as language access goes, that's not covered under ADA, and that is. Okay. It's basically a mandate from CPS, as far as I understand, but is not. But I don't know what the repercussions of not meeting the needs of the community are. And I think Justin is here. If he wants to speak to that, that'd be awesome. We didn't ask you that already.
You have to unmute him, give him permission to speak, I think.
Thank you. Thank you. So again, a lot of this leeway comes down to the LSC. For the non-LSC related meetings, like have been discussed here very recently, it comes still down to the fair and reasonable expectations. So the example that we talked a lot about with Claire was German, right? If somebody is in your PPLC or maybe BAC or PAC and is a member of the community and speaks German, you might be challenged and required to represent German. On the other hand, if somebody wants to do, I'm not quite the Star Trek person, but the Star Trek language that is loved.
Klingon.
I don't think that would ever be considered fair or reasonable, right? So Claire has done a great job mentioning those two key words multiple times, and that's where we're at. There is another question that was just a moment ago, so I would not mind speaking to if you LSC folks would like. What your responsibility is comes down to fair practice, right? So the thing that would get you all in trouble or you would have some sort of issue with is if you are vindictively saying, no, we don't want to translate into Klingon. Nobody's doing that. You are all doing a great job being ahead of the curve here, and that matters a lot. And don't skip over that point. So, does that work for you, Chairwoman? Or I guess Mr. Seawright answered the question. Can I do better?
That answers my question. Thank you.
I'll be here.
Thank you. We appreciate it, Justin. And of course, I mean, yeah, we have been talking about fair and reasonable, and those are, of course, the minimum standards. And we, as Justin said, are doing more than that if, already. And if we officially adopt these as like regular protocols, so that even when we go back in person, we can still maintain virtual meeting access, which will keep more democratic access expanded to more people. Because as we all know, we've had way more people participating in meetings since we went to virtual meetings. So I'm trying to the reason that I'm interested in this is primarily because accessibility is a social justice issue, right? Disability justice and racial justice are intrinsically linked. And that's my primary motivation. My secondary motivation is to, make this easy for us in the future and for other LSCs in the future to keep the ball rolling and get as many people engaged as possible. Does anybody else want to chime in about what's been said so far? Questions or ideas?
No, but I wanted to thank you and Principals Amy and Justin for working hard to bring this clarification to us.
Yeah, as part of the training and stuff, like I also try to attend other LSCs, LSC meetings, and there was one where they actually, the folks that were speaking, there was a school where I think the primary language is Spanish, and they were starting in Spanish, and the same people were at the same time translating in English. Like, I was like, it's just like palpitations, trying to kind of figure out, like, how did they, get that done? So yeah, I agree. Thanks for bringing that up, and I think there were also a couple of people, a couple of parents that brought that up. I think it's important. I think we're in a good place. I hope, to continue that conversation. I just hope we are able to save the translated material and we can share it.
I had a question because Ms. Amy, you said that 48 hours notice might not be long enough. So one, what would be long enough, and then what happens if someone requests a reasonable accommodation 48 hours in advance and we can't fulfill that request?
That's what I'm not sure. So because we haven't like enacted that sort of a process, I'm not sure what the timeline will be to work with the ADA office. If there's a quick turnaround, then 48 hours may be a reasonable process to continue with. If we're finding that 48 hours doesn't work, then maybe increasing that. I think the policy as it's written says 48 hours. And then it's also that just because an accommodation is requested does not guarantee that it will be granted. So that's sort of the other part of that policy.
Yeah, that language is just in line with the legal minimum standard, and is obviously, we would like to do better than that as a kind, caring community. And I know when we were talking to Robin Aspatia about this, because she has a lot of expertise and was willing to help us, she mentioned that she's experienced and heard that it's not very easy to do a 48-hour turnaround. And so that's why I put that language in there of like, please, if you can do it more in advance, with something like a regular LSC meeting, when they all are at the beginning of the year, and you can let us know, and we can set it all up right away, or at least we have time then to accommodate. It's harder with like the special meeting or something like that, perhaps. But yeah, there's these legal minimum requirements, and then there's also very little accountability for them. Like, there's not a lot of consequence for not being accessible, which that's a structural issue bigger than Peirce, So, yeah.
I think this all sounds really great. Thanks for doing all the work on this. I like that we're going to go try to reach out to the community and like pull people, into the process by letting them know that they can request these accommodations. I think that's really great. I think we might also want to consider like noting what the existing accommodations already are like on the meeting invitations, so that people know like there's Spanish interpretation and other types of accommodations in case those are hurdles for them even considering joining this meeting and others. And I've just got a question about kind of what happens like if we get a request like for like Vietnamese interpretation, for example, that goes to Ms. Amy, like then who decides if we can accommodate that or not? Is that just a decision that Ms. Amy makes? Is that something that's brought to the council? I guess it's kind of two questions, like who has to try to make that happen, and then who gets to decide that the effort is not fair and reasonable and we're not going to be able to accommodate it.
I think that that's where it comes to the school, and then we look to see what are the resources that we have to work with. Is it an ADA or is it language. And so we know when we have meetings with families that require interpretation, we make sure that we have interpretation available for those families. So I think it's just, I think we need to come to the school and then we need to try to like find somebody. We've had other schools reach out to us to send an interpreter to their school for a meeting because they know that we have somebody who speaks the language of a family in their building.
Yeah, my understanding is that it's at the principal's discretion because it is like, it's, you know, it's her responsibility, you know, according to ADA rules and CPS. And so it would be up to Miss Amy to calculate whether or not it's, you know, we have the money for it, or we can do it find someone in the amount of time and with the resources available. And, you know, of course, as an LSC, we can all help troubleshoot that, or as an even broader school community, we can help troubleshoot those things. But that's my understanding from our conversation with Justin.
So can I ask an accessibility question that relates to the chat? Okay. So at the last meeting, one of the accessibility concerns that was brought up was, I believe, by Robin, who said, you know, if you are using the live transcription and the chat is there, then you're missing something trying to read the chat. Or if you're visually impaired and using a text reader to read the chat, then you're missing what someone is saying because of that. So just to clarify, from an accessibility standpoint, because we're saying that the chat is optional, that this is not an official part of the meeting, that those concerns don't fall under ADA because it's not the official part of the meeting. And so we do have a chat transcript. So are we saying that because you can get a transcript and look at it later, that you don't have to do that live? Yeah.
I mean, that's a good point. I actually, you know, that was not part of my thinking so far about the chat. I think because it is not part of the official meeting, it's, you know, and it's optional, that it isn't, it's not on the LSC or the school to accommodate that. Like we need to guarantee participation in the meeting. And I think we're meeting that standard and exceeding that standard. I also think that the alternative is turning off the chat, which has a negative effect on more people. And so there's a balance there between like what it provides and who it provides, what it provides to, that should be taken into consideration. But yeah, I mean, the fact that the chat can be reviewed later is definitely a plus. Do any other LSC members have anything to say before we open it up to public participation?
I guess I just want to reiterate that kind of what the chat not being part of the official meeting kind of, I guess, looks like for me personally as like the secretary note taker. Basically, it means like I'm not reading what's in the chat. You know, I'm not seeing those comments. If somebody, you know, has a kind of public participation type comment and wants it in the meeting minutes and wants to make sure that everybody on the council sees or hears that meeting, that comment, I think what makes a lot of sense is if you don't feel comfortable or for whatever reason don't want to speak up verbally during public participation, to write, in the chat, like, okay, I feel more comfortable typing this. And then that somebody did that and in the last meeting, and then Aisha read the comment on their behalf so that we could all, hear that comment and that it can be recorded then in the meeting minutes. And I won't speak for others, but on the LSC, but I'm not going back and like reading chat comments afterwards. So I feel like it not being part of the official meeting means that at least one LSC member is not, seeing those comments. So if, if something changed and we did want to make it part of the official meeting, then I think what that would look like is chat comments being read by everybody and the chat comments being like linked into the meeting minutes. So it's a part of like the official record of the meeting, which I don't think is what anyone's suggesting, but just kind of wanted to put those, like that dichotomy out there of like what it means for chat to be part of the official record or not be part of the official meeting / record.
And there was, I do always have the chat notifications on, but so April, our chat manager, has just said with every comment, she privately asked the person who writes the comment if they want it to be read publicly. And that's the protocol she and Aisha have been following, so that if there is something that needs to be, that someone wants to be part of the record, she will let Aisha know that, so it can be. So,
I want to point this out right now. And it's not like, it's just to say, I think we said that we wouldn't interact with chat, right? But like what just happened is an example of how when the chat is on, we do actually interact with chat. So there's stuff being typed into the chat that then impacts the conversation that we're having, which becomes very distracting. And so I think if we're going to say the chat will be on, each of us needs to really hold ourselves accountable to truly not engaging with what's in the chat.
I agree. And so that like, that's the best practice that I'm proposing. And that if we eventually vote on this, then we would all have to agree to like turn off, because you can turn off the chat for yourself. There's a way to do it. And then the only person who would have chat open is the chair of the meeting and to communicate with the chat manager. And because I hear what you're saying, Lori, and I agree that like it can be really distracting. And also, I think it's really important to leave the chat open. And of course, that's now going to bleed into the other conversation that we're about to have. So is it okay if we do public participation at this point?
Are we voting to adopt the accessibility language, or are we just saying that this is what we're going to just put in place?
I would like for us to vote on something, if not on Thursday, then at our June meeting. The guidance that we got, I think, indicates that we should put something in our bylaws if we're really going to be solid about it. And in order to put something in our bylaws, we have to have it circulated among the LSC 10 days in advance of the meeting. So we cannot vote on any of this on Thursday, but we could, that's why I shared this out with you all, not in a very timely way, I apologize, but like we can kind of craft that language together for our June meeting. That's what I would love. And of course we can make a resolution to vote on something on Thursday, at least something like, the language about what accommodations can be requested and what accommodations are generally made, that, language that's going to go out with any meeting information. We could at least start with that, I think. Does that answer the question?
Justin raised his hand and lowered it, and I just had to point that out.
Thank you. I missed that. Did you have something to add, Justin? Please do. Okay. Oh, I have to unmute you again?
Yeah, so for future reference, I will never interrupt a LSC meeting. I required to be called on, just for the record. Nicole and Alicia hit a important distinction here. That's very important. If you include the chat function in your official meeting, you're opening yourself up for other ADA issues. So there were two ideas discussed. And one of them can't happen. It really should not happen, is my point. If you are disabled in a specific kind of way, you can't see the chat. Chat will never be accessible to you. It should not be part of an official meeting. And so it really should be, I mean, our recommendation that you guys have discussed, and so I only bring up by example, is have it only on during public comment. My understanding from the conversation I've been listening to is you guys want to leave it on all the time. Great, by all means, your vote, your decision. But it cannot be a part of the official record. You're opening yourself up to other ADA issues that you don't want to do.
Can I ask a clarifying question? How does opening it only for public participation make it less official? I don't understand. That seems contradictory to me.
I think you got a very good point there, Claire. I'm sorry, Chairwoman. I think you got a very good point there. And you guys have brought up a whole lot of good questions here. I bet you all have attorney friends that would love to talk to you about this in depth for a long, long time. So.
Okay, I
I
appreciate
think we
that.
want the attorneys from the LSCR to be the ones talking for as long as possible.
Well, and sir, you actually brought another good point up. Since you spoke up, I'm going to call you on it here. Go back to the fair and the reasonable thing. I like what you had to say, but we have to be careful about services that you guys are not reasonably going to be able to provide, right? So I love this conversation. I'm sorry. I'm going to bite my tongue. I'm going to shut my camera off. Call on me if you need me, but you're in the right path. Thank you.
I appreciate that.
So the recommendation, just to clarify again for myself, the recommendation is that the chairperson does have the chat open so that they can see anything from the chat manager. The rest of the LSC does not. Yeah? Okay.
Yes, that's the recommendation. And as Justin points out, it is up to us as an individual school community to draw our own boundaries and elaborate our own values around these things. CPS is being pretty agnostic about all of it, which I interpret as an opportunity for us to be a flagship for other schools in CPS. Public participation? Are we ready? Thank you, Leanne. Yes, I am a chairperson, not a chairwoman. I appreciate that distinction. Just chair, tomorrow vice chair, as soon as this meeting is over. Thanks, Justin. It's all good. All right, so we're going to move on to public participation. And the only person on stack right now is April.
Hello, I'm April Browning and a volunteer here tonight as the chat manager and a parent of 2 children here at Peirce. Part of the reason I find myself in the role of the chat manager for LSC meetings is because of my ongoing advocacy to allow the chat to be open for the community members to be able to reinforce one another and to be able to have some sense of shared experience around the important matters of our school. I stepped up when asked to support the smooth running of these meetings, and I was also vocal in my desire for democratic community. I felt the added responsibility to volunteer in this first trial period was mine. To this end, I have also chosen not to fully participate as a parent or a community member in the LSC meetings, as I think serving as both roles can be confusing, and did not want to undermine my ability to serve the council as I've agreed to do so. I have stacked first to be able to keep these roles separated today, but have some thoughts that I would like to add to this dialogue around the chat function in meetings and my experiences from this past year. In service to supporting our sense of community and engagement, I have been a strong advocate for keeping meetings at Peirce in meeting format and not in webinar, and in keeping the chat function open at Peirce's meetings, especially for the LSC, as it was recommended by the district to keep in webinar format. I've personally participated and sat in over 12 hours of meetings and in dialogue this year with members of LSC, PAC, and Peirce's administration as a concerned Peirce community member, offering my growing expertise on running effective digital meetings while also keeping our communities engaged and safe. I contributed to the development of the Safeguarding Our Virtual Spaces document to develop comprehensive protocols and keeping both our community engaged, but safe from disruptors and nefarious agents. I have attended many webinars this past year, some at Peirce early on and many professionally, and the relationship with the audience and those presenting in the webinar format is not existent. As a community member, there is no incentive to attend a meeting live when one's experience is almost the same as if you were to watch the recording at your own convenience. The webinar format reinforces a hierarchical and rigid relationship between those presenting and those watching the presentation, not allowing a shared experience or common presence with each other. This top-down format, not allowing attendees to know who is in the room together, creates a feeling that is the antithesis of the community that I believe Peirce wants to create. The isolation we have felt in our Zoom environment has been exacerbated this year, our sense of physical community diminished and strained. The open meetings and chat function, having access to see who is participating in the meeting and the opportunity to be in communication and community with one another continues to be of service, both to meeting accessibility and engagement. It has also been important to be able to see who is not at these meetings, same as if you walked into the auditorium at the school. And I feel like that's an important thing to know as well. From the beginning, from being at meetings and seeing who is there, I also have information on who is not there and whose voices are not represented, which provides a different kind of contextual information for me in my role in other elements where I volunteer at the school. In my professional life, managing a university's fine and performing arts department and maintaining the relationship with our audiences and our communities in this time of isolation became one of our top priorities. The importance of this human connection in our audiences and communications continued to be reinforced. And I have personally spent over 1,000 hours this last year in various online meeting environments, along with professional development, codifying online engagement. Over the course of the year, there's been a lot of conversation on how to effectively use the chat function as both a place of organizing for clarifying information for participants, but also for the way for a community to feel like they're part of something. Having the ability for the audience to engage with each other as a group can bring energy to an event, help with tech support, accessibility, providing resources, and general community building. And it sometimes can be a place of real joy and creating an environment of shared space. Truly, I have been in meetings when the chat broke down the distance and the barriers, and became the heart of the meeting itself. I'm not suggesting that this is what should be done for the LSC meetings, but I only share that it is possible. It can make a meeting experience very powerful, especially when we are all so isolated. It is also important to note that one's behavior in chat, while not part of the official meeting, does have impact. I support the drafted norms that are based on the IB learner profile, and I urge everyone that is a part of the Peirce community to remember that your actions have impact, potentially building community and relationships and also deteriorating them. I try to present myself in the Peirce community as a parent that is principled, open-minded, reflective, knowledgeable, and caring, a thinker and a communicator, sometimes a risk taker, but more often trying to be balanced. I want to speak specifically to something I was called out about by a member of the LSC about ineffectively being able to manage a chat conversation from the April 29th meeting. the meeting that was dominated by the ACE discussion. During that meeting, in the chat, one parent indicated that what was happening in the meeting felt like white supremacy culture playing out, and they were frustrated. Having personally been engaged in a great deal of professional and personal dialogue around trying to develop anti-racist practices in the face of white supremacy culture, especially in these past 2 years, I felt that the comment was reflective of the moment and not intended to be personally disparaging of anyone, specifically at the meeting, but a frustration aired with trying to voice concerns to be met with an oppressive system of culture that stood in the way of actionable change. White supremacy culture is the dominant American culture. It is everywhere. The system is working as designed. A teacher responded in the chat that they did not appreciate being called a white supremacist. I tried in the chat personally to clarify that what was being said to de-escalate the communication, offering that it was not a personal indictment of anyone, but that the systems of oppression were functioning as designed, and provided the link to the characteristics of white supremacy culture website. None of us at the meeting designed the system, but each of us have the power to begin to try and address and dismantle them, even the playing field for more voices. I want to assert that I felt I did manage the chat effectively that evening, communicating with many individuals privately to prompt if they wanted to sign up for public participation, and a 4-hour meeting that held a lot of emotional attestations, which could have erupted into something very toxic, stayed respectful and orderly. And I take umbrage with having many hours of my free labor to this council being publicly criticized. It leaves one feeling like this is a thankless endeavor, a service I'm providing to your meetings. I encourage us to lean into our discomfort and participate in active listening with each other. I encourage us not to feel personally threatened by dissenting opinions. I encourage us not to want to control the behaviors of others, even if they are different from how you choose to behave. Much of what we think of as appropriate participation has come from our culturally specific upbringing. I also encourage us to maintain the norms and try to be kind and assume the best of intentions of the members of our community. We are all members of this community, and it is what we make of it. I encourage those on this council that disparage my participation in the LSC meetings in this function and my ability to effectively manage the chat and the audience, more of my volunteering time to help make these meetings run smoothly, understand there's impact in your words. If there are members of the community that feel threatened by comments in the chat that are different experiences from your own frame of reference, I encourage you to engage in inquiry rather than defensiveness, which is another hallmark of white supremacy culture. Thank you for the council's time.
Thank you, April. Is there anyone else on stack? Okay, Anne is next.
Okay, sorry, I had to unmute myself twice. I appreciate everyone's time, and I do appreciate April moderating this. I feel bad that she feels that people didn't think she did a good job, because I think she does a great job moderating this. The reason why I wanted to speak up is I have a really hard time understanding how the LSC can separate the chat and say we're not monitoring it and say non-official part of the meeting, yet we want to keep it open. In the last couple of meetings I've been in, everyone who is speaking in the chat are also speaking up in the meeting. So I don't also understand this idea that having it creates community because you can see who else is there, when I can see everyone's little tiles as well. And again, most of the people who speak in the chat also speak up in the meeting. I would find it more impactful for those who want to say something, type stack in the chat and speak to the council and to the fellow community members as a whole, instead of just kind of staying behind their keyboard and typing what they feel. I took more offense at the meeting last when the chat was going, when teacher letters were being written out, And it wasn't the white supremacy culture being called out. I mean, that was a distraction, but it was also people typing, "Oh Lordy," into there, like as if there was an issue with what was being read out. I don't think, in my professional opinion, that the Open Meetings Act would say that a recording like the chat is not part of your official meeting if you're going to consciously vote to keep it open. Like if you're going to keep it open only during public participation, then I would understand that is fine, but keeping it open throughout the meeting, and just because the members of the LSC don't see it, it's extremely distracting to other members in the community that are here, that are seeing the things that go on, and seeing the conversations happen, and to be able to listen. I think Robin said it very eloquently last time. Because she has a disability, it's hard for her to follow what is being said and read the transcript at the bottom, and then the chat's going. But even as someone who doesn't have a diagnosed disability, it is hard for me to follow what is being read out or spoken when the chat function is going. I don't think it's something that you can legally sit there and say, and the LSC CPS member can disagree with me, but as someone who is a lawyer and who spent a lot of time working for the city of Chicago and dealing with the Open Meetings Act, I don't think you can sit back and say, we can't see it, therefore it's not official part of our meeting. Everyone can still see it. It still needs to be an electronic device that is held for your recording. So I would respectfully disagree and would welcome someone from CPS to challenge me on the Open Meetings Act, that they're not required to keep that record of it, even if your secretary isn't keeping them in your meeting minute. It's still part of an electronic recording and part of this meeting. So it is, in my mind, an official part of your meeting. So that would be all I have to say for that. So thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Leanne is next.
Hey, everybody, can you hear me? So I want to start with an apology, because I will take ownership of the fact that I was certainly the one who typed "Oh Lord," and that has really come to bite me back in the tush. Put that in the official meeting minutes. I am so sorry for the offense that it caused, for the harm, for the hurt. I am one who wears their emotion on my sleeve. And if I was in an in-person meeting with you all, quite likely I would have said something or made a sound or something that would have expressed how I felt. That being said, I also need to say that I signed on to that meeting late because, as many of us do, we're taking care of children. And so I did not hear the initial meeting norms. And when I said to Javier later, maybe it was the next meeting, I said, wow, those are incredible norms to start a meeting with. And had I heard those initially, I certainly would have held my tongue. So I want to apologize for not adhering to the IB norms that I think you all hold each other accountable to, and for the harm it caused.
Thank you, Leanne. Is there anyone else on stack? Okay. So we're going to have another round of public participation, but I will just wait 5 more seconds in case anyone else wants to get on stack. Okay. Gina?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just wanted to say I appreciate Leanne's recognition of what she said during that meeting, but I feel like there was plenty of time to reflect and to put out that apology. And I understand how she felt that she was either, she didn't, if I'm saying this correctly, she didn't appreciate people saying or interpreting that she may not be the best person to facilitate or be the moderator. And I think because of that statement during that LSC meeting, that's where a lot of that came from. And I think some of the parents that I've spoken to have felt that when people are speaking in public participation, if they are not agreeing with what the narrative of the LSC has, that she may tend to silence them, or she may choose to react to them either in, in the chat. And when somebody is agreeing with the narrative of the things that the LSC is saying, and the LSC is then interacting with words coming from the chat, then she just lets it roll. Now, that may be true, that may not be true, but that is some of the perception of our parents out there. So I just wanted to say that.
Gina, can I ask, are you confusing Leanne with April? April is the one that's
who's monitoring the chat?
April is moderating the chat. Leanne is the one that just apologized based off of the comment.
Okay, so I do have them both confused. Let me say the one for Leanne when she wrote in the chat, but April, so I misspoke and I do apologize that, but as far as being a moderator, that's where the two should have been separate, and I did confuse the names. So I guess if we wanted to re-clarify, I think the moderator, that's what I've been getting from some of the parents. As far as, like I said, with the narrative, and then the other situation did not, with the words that were typed in, I think heightened the tensions in the chat room. And I think that should have been stopped by our moderator at that point.
So
now that last part was my personal opinion.
So Gina, to clarify, you're saying that
some of the parents have spoken with me.
Sorry.
Some of the parents that I've spoken with feel like our moderator is not democratic completely, that they feel when the parents or anyone else participating in public participation are not going along with the narrative or are trying to hold the LSC accountable or any of the other committees, that they are either being silenced in the chats or it's shut down and notifications go out, or, they feel like they're silenced. And then with the oh God situation, they feel that something should have been said by the moderator, a warning given, because that wasn't necessary. Does that help?
That's helpful, thank you. I want to say, I think first I appreciate you clarifying it to make sure that we were clear on, what was related to the moderation of the chat versus a comment at a prior meeting. I want to thank Leanne also for publicly apologizing, because I think that's not always easy to do.
I agree.
But then I think, how are we defining what's appropriate in the chat is what needs some discussion, and I don't know in what capacity that conversation should be held. Because, you know, people have to make decisions very quickly, and one person may not perceive something as inappropriate and another person may. So I think it's important to acknowledge that people are doing the best that they can with what they have in that moment. But then how do we define what the expectation is in moving forward?
And with that said, I agree with you. And then I think as an LSC, if there are certain standards or expectations, then those need to be set and those guidelines need to be followed. If not, it's going to be a free-for-all, or it's going to feel one-sided.
Can I jump in for a second? Ms. Seawright, thank you for apologizing. I know that I was the one reading the letter when that comment occurred. I know the comment was not directed towards me, but to the contents of what was being read. And like Ms. Amy says, I think it is bold to make a public apology. So I do appreciate that. However, I think that the thing that we keep going back and forth here, and I think we can circle over it all night, is, and we'll never have an agreement, is we've talked about the accessibility issue, but we need to talk more about the content issue. And I did state, and I know I am on record stating to Aisha, and I was frustrated at the last meeting that said, you know, what you perceive as harmful is one thing and what I perceive as harmful is another. And I think we all need to respect that what one person says might be, you know, perceived as one way or vice versa. So back to Ms. Ishu's comment, I think having a set of norms would behoove us. And I think that the norms need to focus on the chat should be a functional use in the meeting, a function of I want to talk, a function of can you clarify something. I feel very strongly that the chat should not be used as a place to voice opinion, to comment, or to comment on content. Maybe I'm alone on this island thinking that myself, but I think that if we really hone in and think about what is the function, the purpose of what we want put in the chat. For example, my second grade students in the chat, I say, if you need to go to the bathroom, give me a heads up so I'm not just calling your name. If there's an emergency, give me a heads up. If you have a question that I haven't answered, go ahead and ask me and I'll clarify. But the chat during my second grade class is not for them to comment on each other's comments. Oh, I didn't like what you said. Oh, you know what? That's not my favorite character. I disagree with you. No, that is not what it's for. So I just think as an LSC, and in respect of time and in respect of being redundant, is I urge us to think about more of the functionality of the chat and not focus so much on the content. Let's focus on what we wanted to accomplish in our meeting. And I think that that would save us a lot of heartache, and I think that it would save a lot of harm to people. That is truly my piece. That is truly why I think Evan and I wanted this meeting, was more about the content and making it something that is useful to us, not distracting. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. We do have someone else in stack, I believe. Sean?
Yeah. Hi, thanks so much. I wanted to say a couple of things. So first, I wanted to just respond to Anne and just note that if we don't have the meeting set up with the chat on, then you can't actually see the other people in the meeting. So that is part of having that kind of meeting. If we have it in the webinar, you can't, where the chat is completely off all the time, you can't see that. You can't see who's in the meeting with you, which I think is important. It's really useful to know who else is there, just like you would be able to see in person. So I think that's a really important function of this kind of meeting, whether we have the, I mean, and I don't know if there's a way to turn off the chat, but I know otherwise. But the other thing that I would just kind of note, or a couple of things I'd note. I mean, first, I'd kind of speak to Gina's comment, which I kind of wanted to highlight, I mean, I appreciate that parents may feel a certain way about a certain thing, but it would be really helpful if we're going to make assertions about the objectivity of the chat moderator. All of these chat logs are in the LSC Google Drive folder. So if there's a particular chat that someone felt offended by and felt like the moderator did not do a good job of responding to, taking, we can, taking into account that it's hard to do this in the heat of the moment. I mean, if we're going to make an assertion about, in this instance, April's objectivity, I would really appreciate those parents who have that feeling to provide some evidence from the chat log. Where in the chat log was someone, saying something that kind of was making an non-objective response that April was not responding to. I feel like it's really important if you're going to make an assertion like that or report this sort of feeling among parents, that you provide some sort of evidence. And the last thing I'd say in relation to the conversation we're having now, this is really all still about that meeting back in April. If you go back in the chat logs the last 2 times, it's been completely like no one's saying anything. So basically all of this controversy has effectively shut down the chat as a space of conversation during the meeting. So, mission accomplished, there isn't any chat happening. The only thing people are doing in the chat is saying stack. Or maybe making a clarifying response, or in this case today, I know, Claire dropped in some content that people could read. So I don't know if really anything needs to happen. We've established that people are going to respond very antagonistically if there's any kind of conversation going on in the chat that doesn't feel comfortable. So. Maybe this is actually all a foregone conclusion. We don't really need to do anything. So that's my conversation. That's all I had to say.
Thank you, Sean. Is there anyone else on Stack, April? Okay. So what I would like to do is take a 3-minute bio break and then come back to talk about Zoom chat officially. So if you need some water or to, make a pit stop, now's the time. And we'll see you at 5:03. Welcome back, party people. Are we all here? Okay, I think I see most of the LSC is back. Officially, maybe everybody else is just still listening. I really appreciate the conversation that we're having, and excited to zoom in on the Zoom chat discussion. I feel like I've already talked a lot about chats. I think Jerry's suggestion to discuss functionality is a great one, and to discuss norms is a great one, as part of, what the chat is for and how we expect people to conduct themselves in the chat. So I'll just open it up to any LSC member who wants to chime in.
I believe Evan and I would like to report out some things. Correct, Evan? Go ahead.
So as I mentioned earlier, we gave a survey to teachers and asked for some feedback on the chat function, and we'd like to share those responses. So I would never allow children to speak to each other like some of the adults do in the chat. I liken it to interrupting someone when they are speaking. The chat is intentionally divisive, negative, and inequitable to our non-English speakers. Until that can be addressed, it is inherently unequal.
Sorry. Okay. Getting rid of the chat silences people.
There have been many negative comments posted in the chat against teachers and staff. The comments have been inappropriate to the point that I leave the meeting because it is too upsetting.
With guidelines, it would be more effective.
The chat function is highly distracting.
When you utilize it correctly, the chat can be a great tool. That being said, I don't think it should be on while people are sharing. It's distracting and rude.
It seems like the chat is the current place where disagreement between different LSC members is playing out. People are disagreeing about accusations of white supremacy culture and also the timing and tone of what is written.
Of course, disagreement is normal and inevitable. A good solution might be for the people who are feeling most tension to talk to each other directly by phone and try to understand where they are coming from, and then talk about what would be a good way to move forward in terms of what gets said and how when it is said. This might get at more of the root of the disagreements between people, whereas doing away with the chat would just hide them and make them go deeper.
In the 4 meetings I have attended this year, it seems that the chat function has been used for people to make comments about what other people have shared, both positive and negative. It seems that if this was held in person, people would not have the ability to comment on what everyone else has shared whenever they want to.
I'm not sure it's always productive, but it could be helpful, but I can see how it's harmful.
It can be a good thing, but it can also be a way for people to write things they may not have been willing to say out loud. People often feel emboldened to be rude and unkind in writing, whereas they may not have said the same thing aloud.
People feel more emboldened in the chat and cause more harm. I think giving people a time limit to speak would be more productive.
There are times when the chat is necessary, but it should not be used during presentation or participation. Since we are the ones that have been teaching remotely for over a year, I believe a teacher can tell you the added value of the chat. Even under the best of circumstances, it is a distraction while you are trying to listen thoughtfully and reflectively to what someone is saying.
I think that chat could be periodically turned on and off so that people can add thoughts at particular times. It's just distracting to be in a meeting where people are speaking and the chat is also going off. It's not possible to pay attention to both, and something will get missed.
The opportunity for anonymity is an issue, in my opinion.
As a teacher, I would never have allowed my students to participate in the chat the way that many of their parents did. I think respectful dialogue from differing opinions is essential and wonderful, but many of the participants did so in a rude and condescending way, which is not beneficial to productive dialogue.
I believe it gives another way for folks to participate in this time when everything needs to be digital.
It is a distraction and seems to be a place for name calling and disrespectful views. There are some nice comments, but more are negative.
There is a feature that allows people to indicate when they have a question during public participation. That is when the chat should be open, or the other feature would be better.
We definitely can utilize a lot more information and feedback using the chat function.
While the chat can serve a meaningful function in allowing community members who are in attendance at meetings to share questions that they have about topics of discussion, the chat function at recent meetings have taken on a pervasive role. For example, in the discussion about ACE, the chat became toxic, harmful, and problematic. If this meeting had been happening in person, wouldn't we consider it harmful if someone were to interrupt a speaker to say, "Oh Lord," as a way of dismissing and disparaging a perspective from their own? That is not dialogue, nor is it discussion. In addition, the chat has also been one part of a larger issue of ableism currently present that does not consider the accessibility needs of the entire community.
It seems like chat functions can cause problems.
I expect students to pay full attention to the speaker in class, and I think it is a form of respect that adults should keep to as well. What I saw at one LSC was arguing in the chat, so there were two separate meetings happening. As with all forms of media that you are not speaking directly to people, it allows for an aggressiveness to form. People feel more comfortable to be disrespectful to each other.
I think norms should be revisited and chat should be reserved for only asking to speak or to answer quick questions. Maybe a Google form used for questions, feedback, comments to limit the public open forum.
I think there should be a translator for the chat because there are often entire conversations there.
It can be terribly uncomfortable to speak in front of others, especially when someone worries they may be hurt by sharing their thoughts and comments. Chat makes it easier for some to speak out, but maybe it should be monitored by someone specific to recognize those thoughts and to remind people to be respectful.
It needs to be monitored more closely. I've seen disrespectful comments in regards to teachers. We need to have mutual respect.
As much as I understand that the chat option is helpful and gives people the opportunity to state their thoughts, I feel that too much sidebar happens with it and makes the LSC meetings steer away from the agenda. If we would be in person having these meetings, parents would not be allowed to get up from their seats and voice out their concern. If I remember correctly, you have to put your name down on a list to be able to have a chance to speak.
The meetings that I have attended, the chat seems to be a one-sided soundboard for people to be disrespectful, offensive, and very negative. This also allows for the meeting to be controlled with a specific narrative and welcoming only certain participation that aligns.
The chat should be available for asking questions, but not to interject or make comments on a virtual conversation. Perhaps setting chat rules can help address this issue. Or if you close the chat function, leave a Q&A option. I think the chat option could be helpful if participants have questions but are not comfortable speaking in such a public setting.
It causes people to not really listen. It also seems to be a place where people can make snide, unkind, and harmful comments when they do not like what is being said. We are adults and should act like adults and have productive conversations instead.
I think people can be very rude in chat. It is the same as talking aloud while someone is speaking.
I think the chat is essential to community participation. A lot of the conversation around the chat is rooted in white fragility. It centers the hurt feelings of those being called out for racist behavior over those who have been harmed by racist behavior. Censoring the chat would send the message that concerns will only be listened to if presented in a manner that those in charge deem, quote, respectful, which is the term that means different things culturally. We are expecting people who have experienced harm and pain to present it in a way that does not make us uncomfortable. And it's asking something from them that we were not given in the first place: consideration, compassion, comfort. I think the response to the white supremacist culture comment was a missed opportunity to reflect on how our school perpetuates it and how we can address it. But instead, the response was defensive and prevented meaningful work from being done. If we are truly committed to being an anti-racist school, this is a definite area of growth for us. This has been a helpful resource for me in reflecting on my anti-racist teaching practices. And a link was enclosed.
We wouldn't allow people to say things while others are talking in person. It's distracting to the meeting. It's contributing to the toxic environment some of the parents are creating.
I think the chat function should be disabled in LSC meetings. LSC meetings in person do not have a chat function. LSC meetings in person are not structured to be chat spaces like a classroom. In the LSC meetings I attended in person, if people wished to speak, they would be allowed to stand up and do so at appropriate intervals. Virtual LSC meetings should follow live LSC meeting protocols. If people wish to speak, they can raise a hand and be put in an order to speak, as it would happen in any other in an in-person meeting.
Should not be used to put people down or for rude comments.
To make snarking, rude, sarcastic comments, no. You wouldn't interrupt me talking face to face. Don't hide behind your computer and interrupt. That's what internet trolls do and is cowardly. You don't make a school better with your attitude and hate. You close down communication and people dismiss you after that ignorant bully behavior. Check your emotions and maybe read the learner profile before typing.
I don't have a problem with the chat for the purpose of stack or putting up documents or link. If the chat is there for the public to interrupt and make comments when someone is speaking, it's just another tool for the public to be confrontational.
There are a lot of disrespectful comments in the chat, comments from community members.
Things in text can be taken out of context, and it has seemed to create a divide amongst parents and staff.
I feel chat should not be used while the meeting is going on.
It's understandable to hear different views and voices during these meetings, but there has to be some sort of control in the chat with adults who come across as bullies and disrespect people who are in the meet.
It should not be used. If someone has something to say, they can use the raise your hand feature and wait to be called on. It is not equitable for those that speak another language or are using other platforms to watch the meeting.
When the chat is used appropriately, stack, for example, it is helpful. When it is used for people to vent or comment out of turn is not helpful, almost becomes a parallel meeting. And that is the end of the comments that we received.
Claire, was there anything else that you found out in your research about chat that you might not have covered before?
Yeah, I mean, well, I feel like I've shared most of it. I'm just processing the things that I heard. I'm wondering, Evan and Jerry, how many teachers responded? Like, how many different teachers does that represent?
52 staff members. It was teachers and staff.
And did you ask whether or not those people had attended LSC meetings or not?
Yes, we did.
I would just like to reiterate that the chat serves several functions. It serves the function of allowing members to provide information to each other. It serves the function of taking stack, and it serves the function of creating a proxy for the experience of being in physical space together. Because we don't have that in an online format, we are missing out on really important social opportunities for social emotional health. And so this can be a tool to encourage that. I agree with what Jerry has said about needing norms for these for the chat and for all of us being together at all. What I hear in those teacher comments is a lot of the need for norming conversations, because you know, what has been perceived as disrespectful, I think that can mean a lot of different things. And so I totally agree that we need to have some kind of way of, you know, being together that is open. I don't think that controlling the chat is necessarily the way to go. And I don't know that I don't know that sorry, I lost my train of thought. So go ahead.
Claire, I don't think, I think the point of sharing the comments right now is not, I mean, it will take a while to process. You know, I don't think it's something that right off the bat, anyone in the LSC can process, but I think it is important to recognize that, that there are feelings out there and there are things going on. And I think the point of Evan and I's point of doing this was because you always hear from Evan and I, and sometimes you can think that, oh, this is what Mr. Tradd thinks, this is what Mrs. Baumgarten thinks. So taking the time to hear from the staff and the faculty and the people who interact with our children every day, to me, that is very, very important. And that the relationship between the parents and the community and the staff needs to be strong as we all serve the same purpose to serve our children, right? So I think that that was the exact point of us surveying the staff. And I think it's a time for us as an LSC to reflect on what has happened and how we move forward from it. I appreciate your comment of saying, you know, what can be perceived as harmful and what have you, but we have to acknowledge that this is how 52 teachers in our building are feeling. So we have to acknowledge that, and we have to figure out how to make these teachers feel comfortable, and we have to figure out how to stop this divide before it gets bigger. Because unfortunately, my experience, when things, you know, start derailing, they just kind of keep going. So I think that Evan and I's point of doing this was to intervene and get us back on track and try to build that community parent relationship back up before it becomes too far gone. And Evan, I'm sorry if you want to add something to that.
I have a few comments. Yeah, first just want to start by thanking April for your public statement and all of the hours of work that you put into this, and how thoughtful you've been and how seriously you've taken the role of chat manager. I really appreciate all of that effort. I have an honest question about kind of those who feel the chat is distracting. I know a few people have mentioned ways to turn it off or close it. And I'm wondering if that is, for those who feel it's distracting, if that's solution enough for them.
Can you repeat the question?
So we're hearing from, you know, multiple sources that the chat is distracting. And, you know, Claire and others tonight have explained how to turn off the chat so that it doesn't distract you when you're on the LSC meeting. So I'm wondering if that is, if that's a solution to the distraction point.
I also just want to put out there that I'm assuming that we will be back in person in after the next regular LSC meeting in June. I'm assuming our next one will be in person. So that the whether or not a chat exists is a problem for one more meeting, 2 more meetings.
If there was harm caused, it is important that we acknowledge that and that we build that community trust up again, right? Because we may be back in person and the chat might not be there, but you know how it's still said, it's still out there. So I think that that's really important for us to consider.
Hey, I have a question about the chat log that was saved for the most recent meeting, or the ACE meeting. Was this the first time chat logs had been saved on the Google Drive, or has that been saved historically?
I can answer that. I'm not sure how many meetings, for how many meetings we've saved the chat log, but we kind of inquired about like when that practice started, like when that was shared on the Google Drive. And Assistant Principal Lee confirmed that kind of when he started running the Zoom, that he started saving that chat there. He recalls that somebody asked him to do that in the meeting. So that's how the practice.
And how far back is that?
I'd have to look in the Google Drive, but at least the last like 2-3 months. I'm not, don't quote me on that. I'd have to check.
So the chat recording or the chat logs have not been saved, or were not saved until Mr. Lee started doing that from a request, based on a request from somebody.
That's my understanding. I don't think they were saved consistently before then.
Chat logs are always saved within any meeting. You can get a copy of the chat log. So
You
like,
can get a copy of them.
I mean, on
Yeah.
the Google Drive. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, like shared publicly. Is that what you're asking, Matthew?
That's
Like,
what I'm asking.
yeah.
I said, when did we start? Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm the one, I requested from Mr. Lee a copy of the chat log. So that was for me because other teachers had asked clarifying questions about the chat log. So I requested. I also contacted Miss Amy and asked if this was something that I could request. I requested it, and any teacher who wanted to see that, I allowed them to see it. It's not a secret. So I'm not sure. I think we might be talking about 2 different things.
Yeah, I think we are.
I'm the one who requested a copy of it for reference.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I just want to understand when we started keeping track of the logs. And the reason why, I guess there's a reason why I'm asking this. A couple months ago, and that predated me being part of the local school council. We had a very, very important meeting. I thought it was a defining moment in my experience here at Peirce, which was when the teachers came out and were in solidarity for opposition for what was being put in place in terms of conditions for return to in-person. And during that call, it was very emotional. There was a lot of teachers that were sharing their thoughts, their feelings, their opinions. A lot of it we heard from a lot of people live, right? People stacked, or I don't think we used stacked at the time. Maybe people raised their hands, whatever the case may be. A lot of people came on live and started speaking, and they talked about their feelings about it. There was also a lot of interaction in chat. And at the time I wasn't, like I said, I was not part of the council, but there were a lot of things or a lot of comments that were made in the chat that to me were very helpful to understand the situation, to understand the opinions, whatever they were. And I thought that was very helpful, right? I didn't, and maybe I'm wrong, and that's the reason why I'm asking if there's like a way to get a copy of this and kind of to review that. I didn't think that there was any animosity or any sort of negative comments. That being said, part of, just like you, we're out there, some of the parents kind of talk to each other. I talk to parents. I'm sure folks talk between each other. One of the things that I did hear was that, some people were not necessarily comfortable coming up and piping up and talking online, live, and they were using the chat as an option for them, which is what they felt comfortable with at the time. That may change, that may evolve, and they may do, something else later. But at the time, they felt like that was the best way for them to express what they felt. And so I really like what you mentioned there in terms of the norms. I don't necessarily think that it's going to be such a huge jump because we already have some pretty strong norms already, to perhaps add something to it, to describe what's happening in chat and what can happen or what can't happen. And so that's the comment. Like I felt like the comments in the chat at the time for this particular meeting, which was very important in setting people's expectations and making sure that people knew what was going on. There was a lot going on in that chat. If we didn't have that, we may have missed some of it. And I agree with everyone. Put your hand up and talk. But, I don't know if that's what everybody wants to do and can do. So I'd like folks to kind of maybe give that a thought a little bit. The other thing is, as somebody who does a lot of surveys, Evan, you and Jerry, you guys, you did my job. But anyway, I wish we can, continue the conversation and try and understand and get more opinions and more perspectives so that we understand, the community as a whole. And so I'm glad that you brought this up. I think it's very important. And the comments that you read were very, very informative, very pertinent. I hope that we continue the conversation.
Yeah, I want to say, I think our kind of norms around chat, I think we're mostly there. I don't think there's much, there's a little tweaking maybe to do here. But I'm a little, I guess, concerned about the conversation about us trying to make people feel comfortable, especially when, what sparked this conversation was comments about white supremacy. I feel like that's not necessarily our goal, is to make everybody, comfortable with the content that's being shared, and to have the conversation about what is the appropriate way to, how do we want to call out, white supremacy and racism, because that's what we're kind of talking about here, is the how. like what's appropriate and how is it appropriate to say those things. I feel like that's where this conversation, I guess, like is that really where this conversation, the conversation that we want to have, I guess. And in that case, I think this is something that needs to happen with Dr. Fisher if we're going to talk about like what's respectful, what's not respectful, you know, what's an appropriate way to say something and what's not an appropriate way to say something. I don't feel like that's something this group can, you know, decide without the expertise of someone like Dr. Fisher, because I think that's getting into her territory.
So I'm wondering, I like the idea of norms, but I also wonder, you know, we have protocols in place if our meeting gets hijacked or Zoom bombed, you know, how do we handle someone who feels harmed by something that's put in the chat? You know, the reference of you know, the white supremacy comment, I received many text messages after that comment or those comments were put in the chat from teachers who felt harmed by that comment. Jerry and I interrupted the meeting and said there are teachers or there are people who may feel harmed by the comments that are in the chat. And we were told that the chat has been reviewed and there was no harm done. So I think one of the things is we can't decide as an LSC what harms somebody else and what might experience, how they may experience harm, or respect or disrespect or however we want to word it. So what can we do as a council that when somebody does feel that way, we can address it? And I don't know if that's a message to April, who's our chat manager, if that's, and then the chat is turned off. I don't know, but I think that's the bigger thing that Jerry and I have been trying to, why we called this meeting. You know, I think we need to have some protocol in place for when that happens. If we choose to keep the chat, go.
Thank you, Evan. I think you said that better than I said it. It's exactly what we're trying to say is when it was called out, we were told it wasn't harmful. We can't tell people something isn't harmful. So how as an LSC do we repair that harm or, you know, decide how we're going to make people feel, you know, what they're saying is being validated and what they're saying, the comments directed, they're not being harmed by the responsive comments. But I think, Evan, you said it much better than I did. Thank you.
I just want to point out there's like, you know, this is obvious, I'm sure to everybody, but there's a difference between being the victim of racialized harm and being made uncomfortable. And so I feel like that's an important distinction to make. And I feel like the lines are getting blurred there. And that's why I would suggest kind of moving this part of the conversation like to something that Dr. Fisher can join.
Thank you, Nicole.
Absolutely, I agree with that. I don't think that, I think we need to have that conversation so that we can all be on the same page about what that word means, because I think we're using it. I think the harm that was talked about at the meeting regarding ACE is different than, and I think we need to get our terms clear before we can decide what to do if comments are harmful.
But again, I want to reiterate, there are 44 comments of teachers. The majority of them felt harm in some way, regardless of whether we have a definition of that word as a collective in this body. There are teachers in this building who feel harmed by what was said in those comments. And their definition of harm and what they view as harm was stated. And so for us as a body to negate those feelings is incredibly inappropriate in my eyes.
I also, Evan, thank you for saying it. I also think that these are the educators that spend a majority of their time with our children, right? These are the educators that are educating our children. We should want to repair that relationship, and we should want them to feel valued, and we should want them to feel like their voices are heard. So I agree, Evan, I completely agree with what you said. And I would also like to add that let's remember that these are the educators that makes Peirce what it is today, and why we send our children there. And these are the educators that are helping to build a community and to grow these young children in their minds. Just want to keep that in mind, that the value of the educators at Peirce.
So from your standpoint, where do we take this next? What do we need to do to address it for continuity? Like what, since, what are our next steps? What are the things that we can do to start right away? And there's short term, there's midterm, there's long term options, solutions, ways, right? So now we got the situation, if you will. Now, what do we do about it now that it's been called out, or it's been identified, or it's been noted? What do we do?
Matthew, I appreciate that question, and I don't have an answer for you at this time. But what I would say is that I do think that as an LSC, the first thing we need to do is all get on the same page as to what type of relationship we want to have with our educators. Because what I'm hearing different things. I'm hearing people acknowledging that some teachers felt this way. I'm hearing people, not acknowledging it and dismissing these educators' experiences and their feelings. So I don't think that we really can do anything as an effective council until we're all on the same page as to what type of relationship we want to have with these educators, what their experience and their knowledge in this field means, and how we want to value them as a part of our community. Maybe I'm off base by saying that, but I really think that until we all have a common goal of this relationship that we want to have, how do we move forward?
I think there's no question that the teachers are in the center of these discussions.
But when people are dismissing their harm, as Evan stated, then we are not really valuing them and their opinions.
So,
right?
So let's address that.
Sorry. Well, I mean, I don't have all the answers right now, but I just think, and I'm not talking because I'm an educator, I'm also a parent of young children. And I know that I want to send my kids to a school where educators feel valued, where their experience means something, where people respect them. Of course, we all have room to grow. We all can do more learning. We all can go to school, and improve ourselves. But I know that I want that educator, when they're standing in front of my child, to know that they are valued, and to know that that community respects them, and to know that their feelings matter. And that's what I think we need as a council, to be on the same page, because right now we are not. And the message is getting sent to some educators. And I will say not all educators feel this way in the building, but from the numbers that Evan shared, as a parent, not as a teacher, if I was as a parent at my son's school, I would be very concerned. So I think what I'm trying to respectfully say is that we need to heed this warning as a council, and we need to figure out how we are going to address what happened and how we are going to move forward.
I'm all in.
Bill, did you have something?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I'm glad this is where the conversation is going. I think that, I'll just say a couple of things about what we've covered over the last 2 hours. I'll just say up front, I don't think the chat should be turned off, although I appreciate the fact that it is only for a short amount of more time. That will be an actual issue that we face. I think it's good that we have norms, and I think it's helpful, and I appreciate the work that April's done it's a challenging job. I don't think, and I have not really been in support of, I also just want to appreciate Leanne's apology. I think that is a good indication of sort of some of what I think Matthew and Jerry were just saying just now, which is like, what do we do, right? I think for me, I hear and have heard over the last bit of time, and really actually predating, going all the way back to when we first started having virtual meetings, and some of the anti-racist stuff was coming up as well. I hear constantly and consistently parents and teachers on saying that things like the chat is helpful. I hear parents and teachers saying the chat is not helpful. So there's a divide, but there is actually a kind of a divide in both groups. And so I also hear parents and teachers both saying that some people's feelings are not being centered. It's different people whose feelings are not being centered in different arguments, but that's the core, essentially. I hear parents of color and white parents saying we need to center parents of families of color's experiences more. And in this conversation we just had just now, I hear Jerry and Evan saying some teachers, not all, and I appreciate the broadness of the survey and the sharing all of it so that we can hear a really broad range of experiences. They're saying we're harmed also. And while I appreciate the efforts to kind of, name white supremacy culture and also to name when the difference, I think as Nicole pretty eloquently said, the difference between harm, racial harm and other kinds of harm. I think that those are good efforts on our part to raise the consciousness of our community about white supremacy culture. I don't think that, and this is the challenge that I felt really prior to this, even going back to the previous council, I'm not convinced that the LSC meeting space is a space to educate everyone about all of these things. I think it's not a great space for that. Every space is an education space, but some are better than others. That's why schools are designed the way they are. And frankly, schools are designed pretty poorly for education purposes, as I think our teachers would agree. But I digress. The point is, we are acting like everyone is coming here for a shared purpose that we bring ourselves. And I think sometimes a lot of people are talking from a position, sometimes performatively, sometimes to score points. I don't know exactly. And I guess I'm interested in the question that I think Matthew and Jerry are asking, which is, this is the community we have. Some people know a lot about white supremacy culture, some don't. Some people know a lot about teaching and learning, some don't. Some know a lot about parenting, some don't. Some know the experience of being a person of color, some don't. Some people know a lot about white fragility and like to talk about it a lot, but some people don't. And so what do we do when we have that situation? Talking past each other and scoring points and performing kind of here is I think unproductive. And I would like to have the conversation be geared at trying to acknowledge first the fact that we don't all agree. And then what do we do about that? How do we move forward together even when we don't agree? And I don't think that coming here, and I think the chat is part of, wherever that stuff happens is not necessarily the thing that we should be talking about. The thing that we should be talking about is, what is the purpose of the LSC? How do we move things forward? And if I have something to say that moves something forward, great. If I don't, please don't talk. Please don't chat. Please don't show up to public participation. Only come if you have something productive and that's going to move people forward. And I think that if we can try to do that, I think that, and nobody's going to get it perfect, I understand that, but if that's kind of what we're trying to do, then I think that that would be better use of this time. I do think there's a lot that this school has to do around, and this community has to do around learning to center the voices of people of color and learn about white supremacy culture and whiteness in general. I think that is a huge gap in a lot of people's knowledge, my own included as a white person. I'm just not convinced that this is the space for all of that to happen. And so I would like us to sort of try to use the time more efficiently, more thoughtfully, and more productively and educatively. And if we all kind of bring that to what we have to say, then I think we can be able to meet the needs of this body. And then maybe those of us who are interested in trying to work on those other pieces could do those in other spaces.
I challenge anyone to top that.
Challenge accepted. No, I'm just kidding.
I thought we weren't doing one-upsmanship. Isn't that what Bill just said? God, Matthew. Javi, please go ahead.
Oh, no,
Only
I
in
was
humor.
joking.
Only sarcastic.
I was
Sarcastic
joking.
is, I like it sarcastic.
Thank you, Bill, for sharing that.
Yeah, I think it's important. I apologize if I made light out of it. I think it's very important, and I agree with what Bill said. The one thing also that I would like to say is, and I think I've said that before, I'm glad that we're able to have these conversations, however uncomfortable or atypical they may be. I think it's important. I think and that's what makes, that's another reason why I like this. I like this school. I like this council. I like our conversations. They're not always comfortable. They're not always straightforward. And everybody is making sure that they're bringing in their opinion. And I cherish that. And again, if it wasn't clear, thanks for bringing these up. I think they're very important. I do think that we can do our part, and so hopefully, we can do that.
Thank you, Matthew. Does anyone else on the council have anything to contribute before we open it up for public participation?
I just want to thank you for taking the time for allowing us to share those comments and for giving us the space to share something that we felt very passionate and strongly about.
Absolutely. I'm glad we're having these conversations. I think that there is this tension between this being an education space and not being an education space. I mean, part of why we voted to spend money on an anti-racism consultant for the LSC is because our practice is education, right? Like we're not giving a lecture on white supremacy culture, but we can practice anti-racism in our relationships with each other and the way that we treat each other as a model for the school. And so, I absolutely think that this is work that needs to happen in all domains of our school community. And I think that we are lucky to be in the unique position of being highly visible and being the nexus of all these different communities coming together. And so it is hard work, and everybody is being asked to really stretch their growth edges. And I think we can do it. I think we are doing it. And I know that people are feeling hurt and raw and fragile and vulnerable. And that is all really valid. And so I think that we should go slowly and also go. We need to keep moving forward, as Bill said. Toward that end, I did include some norms in that toolkit that I sent out as if we want to start thinking about a preliminary list. I hesitate. I've had that in my back pocket for a minute. I use it in other spaces that I operate in, and some parent groups have something like these norms floating around. And so, maybe we can start thinking about centralizing it or standardizing it as the LSC. This is, of course, work that I think, I agree with Nicole, would be best guided by Dr. Fisher, but there's a present need, and there has been, right? And in the process of onboarding Dr. Fisher has been a very rocky one. So I think we can trust ourselves to try and work through some of it now. So I will send out our norms, the norms again to our council, and maybe we can have, asynchronous email conversations about that, or we can talk about it more at our regular meeting. Does anyone on the council have anything else before public participation? Okay, do we have anyone on Stack, April? Okay. I'll give it like 5 more seconds. Okay, Anne, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I said sack. I meant to say stack. I just want to reiterate, like, Bill, I really like what you said. I think the LSC's role is to move things forward. I think there's a fight to keep this chat open, and it seems like the chat is causing a big divide, but don't understand why the compromise that Gary and Evan have said and other parents have said, like, just keep it open during public participation, seems to be a hard concept. I'm also a little, like, I've said all along, like, calling out people for white supremacy culture is fine, but then when the way and tone it was used at the time it was in that meeting and being called out by the teachers, be said that, I mean, to say that, well, you're just uncomfortable and that's okay, I don't think it's fair to our teachers. You know, I've started joining in on these calls and I don't know, like, I think I spoke up for the first time last week. And I spoke up because I was upset because I felt like an LSC member was shutting down the teachers when they were talking and trying to bring this up. I've said it before, and I think the teachers are one of the biggest assets for Peirce. I think they are the best reason why my child's there. And I feel like what I'm seeing and what I'm watching is not giving them the support that they truly need from us as a parent community. That has always been my favorite part of being part of the Peirce community, is the stuff the PSO puts together to, like, appreciate the teachers and having an open dialogue with the teachers. I appreciate that not everyone thinks, from the teachers, think that the chat is something that is an issue, but you know, I think putting the norms in, even if it's just one more meeting, I think, like, just having it open only for public participation would be the best path forward. So everyone can have their voice heard. You don't have to put it on the webinar. And then everyone can, you know, say thank you when someone has said something. They can say, yeah, I agree with you in that chat. But I still feel like there's not a lot of resolve coming out of this. And I feel like that's not showing support to our teachers. That really is an important thing, that there is something that comes out of this that, okay, we've heard it, you know, whether you think being uncomfortable is okay, I think that saying, well, that just makes you uncomfortable isn't really an okay place to come from either. And I also think that if you're you can't sit there and say, I don't see the chat, therefore it's not a part of this public meeting, especially if the logs are kept and you can keep it. Part of the public meeting, whether or not you mean it to be or not, whether or not you're seeing it or not, the log is kept. It's an electronic, you know, version of your meeting. So, you know, I think it just on that standpoint too, it needs to be thought more thoughtfully about that chat, about what's going on with that function. But I do appreciate April moderating it. I think she's doing a great job. I appreciate Leanne apologizing. But I think that the chat seems to be more of a divide than an assistant in building community. Then if that's the reason for keeping it, I don't think it's a good reason to keep it, because I think it is creating more divide in our community than it's intended to do.
Thank you, Anne. Is anyone else on Stack? Gina?
Hi, I just had a question regarding Dr. Fisher. Is Dr. Fisher going to have access to these prior chats and do any reviewing of some of our previous LSC meetings, or any of our meetings that we've had, in order for her to be able to guide us and give us, her thoughts and what our best practices could be. I think, as a parent, if we had more information on what our expectations are from her and how we can move forward as a school, all the stakeholders together, I think that would be very valuable. So I would just ask the LSC that they share some of that information, because right now I feel like it's just been blanketed. We don't know what was shared with her in this proposal that was given to her, or the request for proposal, what we expect her to accomplish. So I would just ask again that you, as an LSC, share some of that information. Like, she's going to be working with the LSC. How will those things roll downhill to the other stakeholders? And I do want to say, as a parent who's been with Peirce for over 12 plus years, I do, and a former LSC member, I do appreciate the relationships that we've built across all stakeholders' lines. That hasn't been easy work. There was a time when there was a different type of huge divide. And as parents and as LSC members, we've worked with our teachers and our staff in order to build those relationships. We tried to reach out to parents. And I think participation has grown, because not only have we been speaking, but we've been listening. And I think one of the biggest issues that I have is when there is a white person that may feel that they can speak for me, a woman of color, on what my harms are or what my harms are not. And I think Bill is right, or I agree with what Bill is saying, that the LSC needs to move, try to move the school forward. I really feel like this racial equity is very important. I think we all want the end goal. It's just we're struggling to get through it. And because there is a divide between the stakeholders. So, yeah, I look forward to hopefully seeing those expectations from Dr. Fisher. And thank you for having this conversation. I feel that that it's a little different than how it started off in the beginning. So thank you.
Thank you, Gina. As a point of clarification in answer to your question, Dr. Fisher has already been watching our LSC meetings. So and reading minutes and stuff. So she's catching up for sure. And as far as her proposal, I don't know if we included that in our meeting minutes, did we, Nicole? Or like made that available? I don't know if we're allowed to.
We have not. I was told it was proprietary. What we did include was notes, like when she came to speak to us about her plan and like the 4 different events that she had proposed.
Thank you. Yeah, that's, you're jogging my memory now. Yeah, so Gina, we are proprietarily obligated to, that's Dr. Fisher's property and we cannot release it publicly, but we do have in our meeting minutes from the April 29th meeting, her outlined plan. So yeah. Any other public participation?
And just to respond to Gina, if you're talking about me as the white person trying to speak for you about your, what harms you and what doesn't, I apologize if that's me that you're referring to. That's not my intention to try to speak, for you in that way. I know intention doesn't matter. It can have the impact either way, but I just wanted to, publicly apologize if it is me that, you're speaking about.
Thank you, Nicole. Any more public participation? Going once? Going twice? Okay, well, this has been a 2.5 hour meeting. I hope that it's been productive, at least in terms of folks being able to feel heard, and we get to kind of dig into the meat of it a little bit more. This was a special meeting, so there's no voting on anything today, but we might want to think about what we want to put on the agenda for Thursday to vote on. As I said, we can't vote on bylaws, but we could, take some other resolution or make an agreement amongst ourselves for the next 2 meetings regarding chat or whatever we want to do. If anybody has a suggestion now, feel free, LSC members, to voice that. Okay, I think the last thing I would like to say before we close out is just.
Also,
oh, go
Claire,
ahead, Bill.
I'll just say, I think the norm, I already stated my preference just personally for leaving the chat as is, even though I hear all the concerns that other people are saying. I think the norms that you've put together are great, in addition to the norms that we've already got in place. So I would supplement them. One thing that I would like to see change, or I don't know if they're in there or not, is I do think it would be helpful if there was some, and I don't want to put the responsibility on April necessarily, or maybe it's on Sam, I don't know, but there are very few non-LSC members left here today, but 2 of them are unidentifiable. One says a Peirce parent and one just has a first name. And I think it would be an important norm is to have people's full names. I'd even like it if they put their stakeholder identity, if possible, parent or community rep or staff or teacher. I don't know if that feels problematic to other folks, but I think that's helpful, and I think that would go a long way towards. Okay, I see. The Peirce parent is now direct messaging me, and that's not a requirement. So,
right, this is
why
why
I think
we let them in, because they threatened us with it's an OMA violation, and the closed captioning on YouTube isn't working, and so for accessibility, I need to be in this meeting. So that's why I let them in, because I didn't want to be further distracted from what we were actually doing.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I think that, all the advice about some that I gave myself in terms of following up with people or being able to address people if they feel harmed, or if they, like all that stuff, it makes it much harder if you don't know who the person is that's saying those things. But, this is why I didn't, well, anyway, that was my comment.
I appreciate that. And we do have that as a in this virtual meeting safety protocol that April and Aisha and a bunch of other folks put together. That's one of the protocols, is that we ask people to rename and put their role as a condition of participating in the meeting, as a security measure. And that's why we offer YouTube for folks who don't want to identify themselves. So yes, I violated that today by allowing the person in. So. Okay.
Claire, question for you. Do you want me in the meeting minutes to link to that Google Doc? I know it's a draft.
Yeah, that's fine, I think. Yeah. Or I can send you a PDF of where it is right now, so that if it changes or we use other parts of it, we can see how that has changed.
That makes sense.
I'll just download it right now, and send that to you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I really appreciate you all having this conversation. It's really tender stuff. And I just want to reiterate that I personally feel really committed to being with you all in community and like trying to make it work. And that I acknowledge that that is hard to do, and that there are a lot of different sometimes competing viewpoints and needs. And I think that we're all doing our best to balance those. And I think that going forward, it will be helpful. The less abstract and the more concrete we can be in addressing harm, the more effective it will be. You know, kind of like Bill was saying, if we don't know who someone is, we can't address the harm. Like, so I think that's something to keep in mind as we think about how to move forward. And I know that that is part of a bigger conversation that we have already partially had about people feeling comfortable to have that confrontation, or that, you know, to engage directly is not always, doesn't always feel safe. But I just appreciate everybody for trying. So unless, does anybody have any announcements or any last things that they want to say before we move to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Thank you. Does anybody second the motion?
I second.
Okay.
You're awesome.
Cool. This meeting is over.